All right, we are ready to get started this evening. We're glad you all have made it in. We know we'll have a few more to come in here momentarily. For those that are online, we're glad you're joining with us online. I hope you're enjoying this study of the heart, talking about heart diseases and their cure, which is the book we've referenced several times, and also just discussing from a kind of a general topic of from the inside out, because that's what we're trying to help correct. We're trying to help that inward man, that inward person to be more like God and to overcome these things that tend to weigh us down. Tonight we're going to deal with three that are really closely tied together, but do have some separate distinctions that we want to make tonight. And it's, I guess, in some regards, going to be a little depressing at first because we're talking about sadness, discouragement, and hopelessness. And I don't know how often you read on medical journals, or you read about depression, or you read about anxiety, or any of these things that are kind of fall within this same category. But while the United States is a very, a wealthy country, and we have pretty much every advantage that could be had in a country we have here, we also at the same time have a lot of people that struggle with anxiety, that when they face fears and doubts, they overcome them. We've talked about those in previous lessons. But that also covers things to do with sadness, with discouragement, and with hopelessness. Now, these heart diseases we've talked about so far and that we're going to include tonight have sent many people seeking after help. Some have seeking after mental help from a doctor in that field. Some, it really boils back to a physical condition. It's a physical condition that they have that does not allow them to overcome things as quickly, or that holds them back in some physical way. I know Gary has told me many times that some of his friends that work in this field oftentimes will tell someone that you come in and they are depressed and they're dealing with anxiety, they're dealing with all kinds of things like that. They go and get a physical. They go and get a health physical to make sure that their body is healthy before they start working on the mind. And so sadness, discouragement, hopelessness, these are things that plague our heart, that plague our mind, that plague that inner person. And so we're going to begin tonight talking about sadness. And so I want you to think for a moment some things that make you sad. I'm going to try to stay a little bit more upbeat so it's not as depressing as it could be. But think about things that make you sad. Hannah and I love watching sappy movies on TV. And we do that because they're usually the cleanest movies that are on TV. And so, whether it's a movie for a child or it's just a general love story, I know we used to like watching Hallmark movies. We don't watch as many of those anymore, but we used to like those. They're kind of sappy and kind of just a general love story. Well, within those stories, there comes this moment that something sad really happens. A loved one passes away. Someone moves away. Someone loses a job. There's all kinds of things you could throw in here that they're just sad. And so we define sadness as an emotional pain associated with or characterized by feelings of disadvantage, of loss, of despair, of grief, of helplessness, disappointment, and sorrow. And so within this, sadness is very broad in what sadness could be, because sadness is just this general feeling. It's something that is internal. It can be shown external, but it's felt first and foremost internally. It is this feeling, it is this emotion that, we have been taking advantage of. We have a disadvantage. We have lost something or someone. I know that I have been to the funeral of people's pets. Now, I know most of you are thinking about dogs and cats. I've actually been to the funeral of a pet goldfish. And when they had a funeral for somebody I knew in college, they were sad. They cried about that. It meant something. That fish meant something to them, and therefore, we helped them in their sadness. Now, Of course, we feel far more sadness. We're talking about the loss of a loved one, of a friend. The pain that is felt there, the grief that is experienced there is something that no one can really ever understand because they're not us. We deal with grief in our own way, each individual person does, and therefore the grief that you feel and the grief that I feel, while they might have similarities, they're not exact and they're not the same. Now, there are very common things that can help us overcome things like grief and that kind of sorrow that they're pretty much universally helpful. But as far as that one thing or that final thing, grief is a process and it just keeps on going, and it's something that people are going to continually deal with. They're sad. They've lost someone, they've lost something. I know that recently we helped a fellow member, and her daughter had lost some of their possessions because of a flood. A pipe bust, it floods things, and that's a loss. It's not a loss of a person, but it's a loss of property. And no one likes to lose property. It makes you a little bit sad. I know back in 2020, 2020 is, we want to say keep it back there, leave it alone. But 2020, started out really good. January was great. February, my apartment flooded. So February of 2020, my apartment flooded, and pretty much, how the rest of 2020 went. March happened, and every other month after that. And so, there was some loss. There was loss to property of some of our possessions when our apartment flooded. It wasn't something that I liked. It wasn't something that I enjoyed. I was a little bit sad over a few of those things. I was a little bit disappointed. Throw the word helpless in there. Well, all right, I think we're changed over to a new mic now. Sorry for that for those that are online, but talking about sadness. And so I talked to my mom this morning, and as I said before, she's in constant pain. She's in pain every day, pain hips, knees, just whatever it can be. She had her vaccination yesterday, and I was a little sick from that, just a little low-grade fever, nothing much. But, I don't like anybody that I know is suffering or any kind of pain. I don't think any of us do. Especially when we're not able to help. I remember when my children, especially when they were babies, when they got sick, and there's just no way to let them understand, what's going on and why this is why it's going to be okay, but why right now it's kind of painful for them. We don't like that as parents. We don't like seeing our children. It's a little sad to see a child having to deal with something like that. Now, let's talk about something that's a little more personal. What about, being let down by somebody you trusted? Because we're human beings, and therefore we have flaws, and we fail, and we fall short. We let people down, and oftentimes when we're let down, we cause sadness. We cause sadness in the individual that trusted us, that put their trust in us, that was relying on us. So that's either us causing distrust or someone else causing distrust towards us. That can be sad. Dealing with your own sin. See, this comes into this idea of disappointment in yourself. I'm disappointed in myself that I, fell prey to this, that I succumbed to sin and that I fell short of the glory of God, as we all have. I feel sadness in my heart about that. I feel sadness, and really talking about this idea of sorrow, because I've sinned before the Almighty God. And we talk about, godly sorrow, that it comes from, it generates a sincere sadness. If you have godly sorrow, which means that you are showing the signs of repentance and that you are motivated and you're encouraged that I am not living that kind of life again. I am doing this and I'm doing better and I'm going to do right and I'm going to do good before the Lord. This kind of progression, there's going to be some sadness felt. You're going to have a feeling, if you have true godly sorrow, you're going to have a feeling of sadness. And it's something that, in that case, it's good. That sadness, that feeling of that means that your heart's been provoked, it's been pricked. And now you're not only having the action, the outward, but you're having the inward, man, is thinking about this, is making a conscious effort to not feel this way again and to be pleasing before the Lord. So dealing with your own sin, seeing the sin of others, just sin in general should make us sad. In fact, here I'll use another word. Sin in general should make us sick. And it's not hard to look out in the world and see all the sick things that are going on. But let's be careful before we start pointing the finger at other people, because we have sin ourselves. And so sin of any kind, whether it's ours or someone else's, that should cause a bit of sadness. We don't like sin. In fact, God hates sin. He doesn't hate sinners, but he hates the sin. He hates the actions. He hates what they're doing. And so sadness in general, this is an emotional feeling that we have, and usually it's in a response for something that happened, something we did. And usually, I was telling Mr. Gary this today, usually sadness is something with a direct event. I'm sad because when my granny died, I was sad. That happened. If I grieved properly, I might not go into the other levels of discouragement and into hopelessness that we're going to talk about later tonight. But it was sad, and I had to learn how to grieve, and I had to deal with that. It was sad when our apartment flooded. It was sad. Also, if you properly handle it at sadness, it might not grow into something else. Sadness is oftentimes starts as just one event, and it kind of depends on how you handle it and how you take care of it, whether it grows into something else. So it's sad. Now, we look at the pains of sadness, and we look here in Matthew chapter 14 and in verse 9. Now, I use this example because I wanted a bad example, okay? So I chose this one, which I guess there was plenty I could have chosen. But here is Herod, and he has had John the Baptist, he's about to have John the Baptist beheaded. Why? Because of his sin. Because of the sin of another person. But actually because of his sin, the sin of several people. He was influenced by the sins of others. He was pushed by his own desires and his own sin. And so here Herod, acting from his sin and being kind of coerced and pushed by the sin of others. So you say sin's working here. He says, you can have whatever you ask. He says that there in verse number 7. So it comes to verse 8. So she, having been prompted by her mother, so obviously influenced by sin, mother to daughter, said, give me John the Baptist's head here on a platter. And so the king was sorry. Nevertheless, because of the oaths and because of those who sat with him, he commanded to be given to her. Here's Herod. Says he's sorry, which I guess that's good. He just wasn't sorry enough. He seemed sad about it. He seemed upset. There was some emotion felt here. But see, his sin in this moment, his sin, the sins of others, the influence of others, the peer pressure that was around him, the status that he had as Herod. Look at me, I'm Herod. It was too much for him at that moment. He didn't respond very well to it. And so out of sadness, or with sadness in heart, He just let it happen anyway. This sadness really didn't motivate him the way that we would hope that it would have. But it was an emotion. It was an emotion that he felt, he felt like, maybe he felt helpless. Maybe he felt there's just nothing I can do. Now, that's an excuse, but maybe that's what he was thinking in his mind at the time. He's obviously going to feel some loss. So, maybe the sorrow is coming from loss. And I feel lost that this is about to happen. Once again, I wish his sorrow had gone a little bit farther and a little bit deeper in that, but he felt something. He felt grief. He felt sorry that this was about to transpire, and he went through with it. So sadness does cause grief, even if it doesn't cause the kind of grief that we were kind of hoping for that's going to be more beneficial. But think about this. Sadness changes our entire disposition. It changes the way people see us and our attitude. It changes our emotions. It changes the way people view us. I promise you, if you walk through the doors, now I know it's difficult with masks on, but when we walk through the doors and people see us, they can start to kind of get an idea of what kind of mood we're in. Are we happy? Are we excited? Are our eyes bright and just glowing and ready to see them? Or are we frowning? Are we upset? Do we look worried? Do we look angry? Do we look tired? So here, Nehemiah, he's sad. Nehemiah chapter 2 and verse 13. He's sad, and it is noticed by the highest ruler in the land. It is noticed by a man that can really determine his fate. And you know what? Nehemiah was obviously sad. It changed his entire demeanor. It changed his expression. People could tell it. They could see the pain. They could see the agony. Now, what's he in pain and agony over? Well, over Jerusalem, over the people, over his city. It was sad to him, and it impacted his way of living and the way that he looked. Now, I want to turn to Revelation 21, verse 4, and this really is a positive verse. It's about what God's going to do, the wiping away of tears. But I want you to notice here in Revelation 21:4, some of the additional pains that come along with sadness, and that's tears. Tears come along with sadness. Now, I know you can have good tears. You can cry for happy moments too. But oftentimes we associate tears with pain, with sorrow, with grief, with sadness. Now, in that context, Revelation 21:4, those tears seem to be tied right there to death. See, death is something that we on this physical earth right here, right now, we have to deal with. And it causes a lot of sadness. It causes a lot of tears. Along with that, in that same verse, Revelation 21:4, you see things such as crying and pain. That whether that's crying over the loss of a loved one, over the sins of yourself or others, that sadness, it truly plagues our heart. And it hurts. It does not feel good. It causes pain. That's physical pain and emotional pain. It causes even, if it keeps growing, can cause that spiritual pain. Us hurting spiritually before the Lord. So sadness is something that really plagues a lot of people. But, as we said before, sadness grows. Yes, an event starts off as sad, and it really is, but how long does that grieving process last? How well do I handle it? Do I handle it? And do I let it get out of control? Because one sad event or one sad moment leads to something else, and I believe that is discouragement. You see, it is sad when we're not given an opportunity. It's sad when we're being taken advantage of. It's sad when we're continually messing up and getting things wrong and we're frustrated. It's sad when we're always notice the word always getting blamed for things. It's sad when things continually are just not going as planned. And it's sad when we feel alone. But not only is it sad when those things happen, those things cause some serious discouragement. And those are just a few examples of discouragement, but you think of this. Discouragement is a loss of confidence or enthusiasm. It's a dispiritedness. Sometimes discouragement is caused by sadness, by fear, by pain, by sin, by emotions, and the list could go on and on. See, here's the thing about discouragement. Discouragement can come from things that are actually sad, and those are real things, and those are things that touch our heart. Depending on who you are, it might affect you differently. Those things are sad. It impacts our fears. Our fears can start to get out of control, and all of a sudden we're discouraged because of the fears that we've let plague us. Discouragement can come around because of pain. A person that deals with daily pain can eventually get so discouraged that they don't think their pain's ever going to end. They're discouraged. And that might, later on we'll see, might lead to some hopelessness. You think of this idea of sin. See, sin, if you fall prey to the same sin over and over and over again, I promise you from the people I've talked to and from even in my own life, that gets pretty discouraging. And it gets a little hard to handle. When discouragement just starts to build and to build and to build, because that's what discouragement does. It begins this vicious cycle of constantly, I'm discouraged. And we got to find a way to overcome that. You know, discouragement comes from our emotions. Now, I said emotions because I wanted to kind of say something that's pretty broad that helps to understand that all discouragement does not come from reality. It can come from perception. For instance, if we talked about walking in the door and perceiving the way that someone thinks or feels or is, there's a perception. Now, we also have the ability to make bad assumptions. So someone walks in the door and they look angry. Well, are they angry at me? Are they angry at somebody else? Are they angry at their family who they were just riding in the car with? It's kind of hard to know. Some people, because of their emotions, and for me, I'll throw in some selfishness on my side, self-centeredness, our emotions get the best of us. And we start seeing every emotion and every assumption and everything that we think to be true, and those things that we don't even know to be true, they start to discourage us. Now, I'm hoping that we're hitting on some levels here that kind of, touching on each one of us. If we deal with discouragement, we're probably hitting on something that you've dealt with before. I know these things that I've dealt with before. So think about this. Think about how discouraging it can be not given an opportunity. How discouraging. Well, we was a child. I used to love playing baseball. Here as a little child, and he sits the bench the entire season and never gets to play. That can be pretty discouraging. Next season, he might not want to play. Now, we understand the best players are going to get to play, but, he just wants that opportunity. He wants that chance. That can be discouraging, not getting an opportunity. Maybe it's happened even here at church, and if it has, I'm sorry. You're not getting an opportunity. I work with involvement, and, I don't always, succeed at that. Maybe you didn't get the opportunity you're looking for. Well, for one thing, I would say in the church, just come talk to us, because we'd love to help with that. Discouragement being taken advantage of, being taken advantage of in the world. I know my grandfather, one of the reasons that he gave for not becoming a Christian was because a Christian tire salesman cheated him out of some money. And he never set foot in the Lord's church again. Or never set foot in the Lord's church at all. So that's pretty discouraging. That impacts us. Continually messing up, getting things wrong, and frustration. That vicious cycle of messing up continually over and over again, it's not necessarily with sin, but just life. Trying to fix something and keeps on breaking the same way. You end up, you set your alarm clock, but you keep on hitting the snooze every morning, you keep on oversleeping, and you keep on getting in trouble with your boss for being late to work. There's all kinds of things that are frustrating, and we get in these cycles, and they're discouraging. Always getting blamed. Now, that word always is pretty tough. Because see, that's based off emotion right there. Always getting the blame, really? Probably not, but it feels that way. It feels like we're always getting the blame. That is discouraging. Things continually don't go as planned. The feeling of being alone, those can get very discouraging. There's several Bible characters that dealt with discouragement, and one dealt with it better than probably I would have, and that's Job. And I mentioned Job because he handles it in such a great way, even though he has some questions, he has some doubts there before the Lord, and the Lord has to correct him, but overall, Job, he did a pretty good job of handling what came his way. Let's look at this. Let's turn over to the book of Job in chapter 1, and starting in verse 13. Job chapter 1, starting in verse 13 through 22, it says, "Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And the messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, when the Sabeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you." Now, just a side note, these are two lucky people. They just escaped these two terrible disasters. But they have come and they're bringing bad news. Hey, these people have come and they've taken what was yours. They've killed your servants. The fire has come down and burned up also what was yours. The servants are dead as well. And then while he's still speaking, another comes to him and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels and took them away, yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the oldest brother's house, and suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and fell to the ground. Now, we're going to pause here. Now, pause there on purpose. Because if you just read that part of that sentence, here's Job, and all these bad things have just happened. He's lost his possessions. He's lost his servants. He's lost his property. He's lost his money. He's lost his sons. He's lost his children. He's lost almost everything he has. And so he rises up, tears his robe, he shaves his head, falls to the ground, and he worships God. Discouraging moment, very much so. This could have, if he hadn't been as faithful as he was, this could have set Job down a very dark path. Right here, this is when he faces a very big, moment in his life. Numerous losses, numerous pains are coming his way. Yeah, he's sad. Sure, he's discouraged, but he doesn't let it overcome him. He falls down and he worships the Lord. Let's go on chapter 2. It is, isn't it? True wisdom. That's a good definition for it. Chapter 2, Job, verses 7 through 10. Now this one's tough. It just adds on to it. Here he is in verse 7 through 10. "So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took himself a potsherd with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes." So here's Job, and he's covered with these sores from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head. And so he's taking broken pieces of pottery and he's just scraping them off his skin. Okay, this is like cutting yourself with glass to try to remove these sores, or with very sharp object, just trying to scrape it off the skin because he's in so much pain that feels better. And here he is, and I wish that was the most painful thing that he felt in this moment. But then his wife is going to speak. And his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." Now, one thing I've overlooked numerous times is how this impacted Job's wife. She lived there too. She benefited from these livestock. She benefited from these animals. Likely her children. So there's probably some sadness going on in her. Sees most of this, though, to be targeted at Job. Job is the one now that's plagued with these sores. He's the one that's in dire pain. He's the one that's in agony. And so she turns to Job, and while Job's faith has been holding strong, she turns to Job and she says, Job, why do you still have integrity? How are you still holding on to that? Just curse God and die. See, I think his wife, while giving some terrible advice, I think she had probably been overcome by sadness and by discouragement. And in her mind, things were hopeless. But Job, he's sitting here and he says to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Now, I don't dare say Job was perfect, because he wasn't. He was a man. But in these instances right here, in this part of the story, Job's doing a pretty good job of not letting sadness or discouragement overcome him, even though it was a very discouraging situation. It was tough. I want to think about the children of Israel. I'm kind of changing gears a little bit. The children of Israel, they went through some discouraging things. Now, a lot of this was their own doing, but some of it wasn't. The fact that the children of Israel were in Egyptian captivity was not their fault. Okay? There was a king that arose in the land that did not recognize Joseph or his descendants or his people. And he imprisoned them because they were so many and they were mighty and they had an army, or they had enough to have an army and could overtake them. So they imprisoned them. And they were slaves. And they mistreated them and they abused them. And you might want to say it's just not fair. It's just not right. It's the way of the world at the time. So here in Joshua chapter 1, they've been set free. Not only have they been set free, but they have got to see God on display numerous times by Joshua 1. And in Joshua chapter 1 and verse 9, speaking here to Joshua, he tells him, I do not want you to be dismayed. Now that word dismayed can also be shattered, which we talk about discouragement. That's kind of what discouragement feels like. It feels like we're just shattered into pieces. I don't want you to be dismayed. I don't want you to be shattered. He wanted him to be courageous. He wanted him to have no fear. Now think about it. Think about what the children of Israel went through. We already mentioned, the hundreds of years of captivity. And now we come to Exodus chapter 14 and verses 11 and 12. We see them there before the Red Sea, and they're almost out. They have almost escaped. But now there's a sea before them. They are surrounded. The armies are pressing down. And they're wondering, couldn't we have died back in Egypt? Couldn't we have just found a place to bury us over here? Wouldn't that have been better? They had probably really joyous when they got set free. But then they see the armies and they're feeling something. They're feeling some emotions. They're starting to rise in them. They're starting to feel pretty discouraged. I think they're jumping all the way to the level of hopelessness, really. But here they are. And they're going through some stuff, and they're wanting to know, why has this happened to us? They do it again. They get across the Red Sea. God obviously provides for them. He allows Moses. He gives Moses the power, and Moses holds his rod up. God parts the Red Sea. Moses doesn't part the Red Sea. God parts the Red Sea. But Red Sea's parted. They escape, and it's all great until they get hungry, until they're tired, until they're thirsty. Exodus chapter 14, 16. We see them once again. They're grumbling. They're complaining. They want something to eat. Have you brought us out here to die? Was that the purpose? These people had let discouragement and sadness, maybe even stemming over from their years of captivity, it overcame them. Here they were, and they were captives, and many of them had probably started to waver on their faith in God. But then here comes the deliverer. Here comes Moses. He's back. And it took some time. It took some effort with the people. It took God sitting down these plagues. I think the plagues were for the Egyptians. I think the plagues were also for his people, so they could see God in action, and he was in action. And so here he is, and he's bringing them out. But I think they're still dealing with some discouragement they had. And I think they show that on display as they come out into the wilderness and as they grumbling. And then you get to Numbers chapter 13 and verses 25 through 33. The grapes back on poles. This is amazing. It's literally a land flowing with milk and honey. And they make it to this land, but what do they see? They see giants. They see people that are bigger than they are. They see tall cities. They see people that are probably going to beat them in a one-on-one, face-to-face kind of fight. And they're discouraged. And they waver. At least 10 of the spies waver, and 2 hold steady. But 40 years of wandering. 40 years of wandering, and that brings us back to Joshua chapter 1, when the Lord is telling Joshua, I do not want you to be dismayed. This is a message he's going to be passing on to the people. He didn't want them to be dismayed either. He didn't want them to be shattered. He didn't want them to be discouraged. He wanted them to trust in him and to go into that promised land and take it because he had already given it to them. He had really already given it to them 40 years prior to that. But they weren't ready to take it. They were discouraged. And that discouragement, it cost them, and cost many of them, that land that they had been promised. Hopelessness. See, sadness and discouragement, they grow. And they grow into something that we call hopelessness. Elijah, I believe, felt that hopelessness in 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 through 6. We've mentioned him before. But Elijah, yes, he was discouraged. But Elijah just felt so alone. He felt so by himself. He felt like all his enemies were surrounding him. And I think even if it was just a moment, even just for a few minutes, even just for just a second, however long it was, I think his hope started to dwindle and started to fade. The Lord comes and provides for him and takes care of him and makes sure that he has, what he needs. And the Lord even sets up a plan of what he's supposed to do next and who he's supposed to anoint and who's going to take his place after Elijah is gone. The Lord's working. The Lord's active here. But here, Elijah, he had been working so hard and so long, and things were starting to get pressure, and the Lord was there for me, and he needed to trust in him, and he did, but he felt some real pain here. He went through something, and I think seeing Elijah having to go through this could speak volumes to us today. Just because we feel sadness and discouragement, and even at times, in a moment of weakness, we start to feel a little bit hopeless, doesn't mean we have to stop there. It just tells us where we need to turn back to. It tells us what we need to focus on even more. I want you to think about Judas, Matthew chapter 27, verses 3 through 5. Judas did not have to hang himself. Judas sinned, yes. Did Judas have to hang himself? No. That was not required. Okay? Now, the people, was he going to do it? Yeah, he was. But did Judas have to hang himself? No, he did not. He did not have to let that despair and that sorrow and that hopelessness overcome him in his life. He made that decision, and nobody made it for him. You think about Sarah. Now, Sarah, she was dealing with hopelessness and something else. She was dealing with hopelessness in the birth of a child, or the desire to have a child. And she was discouraged. You can kind of tell that for a while. But then her hopelessness, I think, really kicks in when she decides she's going to go ahead of God and she's going to provide her own, heir, her own offspring through her servant. That situation didn't turn out very well. Think about Rachel. Rachel sitting there. Rachel was the most beloved. Rachel was the one he loved. He loved her far more than he loved Leah. But Leah was able to have multiple children. I mean, child after child after child. And even when she stopped, some time went by again, and she had some more because of the blessings of the Lord. It took Rachel a long time to have children, and it was kind of discouraging. And I think she lost a little bit of hope for a while. And she too She's going to give her servant. You think about these women and their desire to have children, and it's a desire that I can't really identify with. It's a pain that only people that have gone through it can really feel. And it's something that we mourn with them and we cry with them, and we're there for them through that. I think about Hannah. Here she is, and in her wailing and in her tears, in her moaning and her crying before the Lord, she actually gives off the perception that she's drunk, even though she wasn't. But she's there, and she needed help to overcome. Now, thankfully for Hannah, she turned where she needed to there in 1 Samuel 1 through 18. She turned to God. See, when we get hopeless, when we feel overcome by discouragement, we feel overcome by sadness, we need to turn to God. We need to turn to God in prayer. And James chapter 5, verse 13, tells us that those that are suffering, pray about it. Go to God in prayer. Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 through 7, we see this idea of prayer, but we see also what this prayer is going to provide. We're going to the Lord. It's going to provide that peace. It's going to provide that peace that we don't understand, that we cannot comprehend, but that prayer does work, and we need to believe that. We need to turn to God in prayer. We need to turn to his word. Isaiah 40:31, a very popular verse. We're talking about, this renewal of strength, that God's going to provide, that he's going to be there with us, that he's going to protect us, that we're going to be taken there under his wing, and he is going to be our God, and we're going to be his people. A very comforting verse. Romans 15, verse 4, that we might have hope. Psalm 3, 1 through 8, we see David, dealing with times of trouble, and, he's there. He's right back to the word. Now, I mentioned these Psalms 3, 1 through 8, and Psalm 119, 105, talking about, thy word is a lamp unto my feet. Because I really believe that the book of Psalms, if you're dealing with sadness, with discouragement, with hopelessness, turn to the book of Psalms and just start reading. And I promise you, before you get very, very far into it, you're going to start seeing what God can do to help with your sadness and discouragement, hopelessness. Remember, God is in control, Philippians 4:13. I know this is in the context of contentment, but the application is still very true, that we need to know that God is in control. To remember that we're never alone. I wish we had time to read Romans 8, 18 through 39. We just don't. Mr. Bob said last week, great passage right here, that nothing separates us from the love of God. Hebrews 4, verse 15, and John 11, 35, I think help us point to the fact that Jesus, that God, he's able to sympathize with us. He's able to be there and to shed a tear, to understand, to even go before the Almighty God as a petition there before us. And so we need to remember that about God. We need to remember God's in control. Remember we're never alone. We need to rest. We need to lay our burdens there upon the Lord, Matthew 11, 28 and 30. We need to read things like Psalm 23 and recognize that he is our shepherd and he's truly going to lead us down those paths. We need to think about things that are good. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8, put good thoughts into our mind. The sadness might not go away very quickly. The grief's hard to overcome. It's a process. The discouragement, yes, it weighs on us, but think about good things. And thinking about those good things, we count our blessings. Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 3, we see about spiritual blessings, and those we need to count, especially, and be grateful for each and every day. We need to remember our values. Psalm 139, 13 through 15. Remember that we're valuable. Remember we have worth. Remember that we matter to God and that we matter to other people. If we truly want to overcome our sadness, discouragement, and hopelessness, we need to do something for somebody else. Now, I say that as a practical solution, but if we really want to help ourselves overcome sadness and discouragement and hopelessness, get out, get active, and try to help someone else, because in that process of that, we can start to help ourselves to truly overcome. And then never lose hope. Put your hope in God. Put your hope and trust in him. Because if our hope's in him, sadness, discouragement, and hopelessness, they will not stand a chance in overcoming us in this life. And we already know that Jesus Christ has won that victory. And so these are some things we wanted to share with you tonight on sadness, discouragement, and hopelessness. And we'll see you all next week.